Hello everyone. This is the first of several introductions to the anatomy of the eye. In this video we will be examining the external structures of the eye. We're going to go ahead and start with the familiar and look at the eye as it appears externally. When we look at the eye, some of the familiar structures are the white of the eye. The white of the eye is known as the sclera. Then there's the colored portion of the eye, which is the iris. The iris is circular or donut-shaped, and at the center of the iris, there's an opening known as the pupil. The pupil is the opening that light enters the chamber of the eye through. Not to overlook the obvious, you have two eyelids. A more technical term for the eyelid is the palpebra. There's an inferior palpebra and a superior palpebra. Just for reference, this right here is the medial angle of the eye. If we made a sagittal section through the eye, you'd be able to see the eyelid here and the lower eyelid or palpebra there. Okay? And what I want to do is use this image to kind of explain the conjunctiva. When you look at the conjunctiva, or sometimes people pronounce it conjunctiva, it's a mucous membrane. And what it does is it covers the external portion of the sclera, which is the white of the eye. So here is part of the conjunctiva, and then it doubles back on itself and it covers the underside of the eyelid. So if you pulled back your lower eyelid, or if you flipped up your upper eyelid, kind of the pink mucous membrane that you would be seeing would be the conjunctiva, right? We're not going to worry about the bulbar versus the palpebral layer. We're just going to lump them all together. Okay. If we continue with this idea, the conjunctiva is an external structure and subject to infection, like a number of body parts are. And when the conjunctiva gets infected, you get what's commonly known as pink eye. What happens is there are small blood vessels, there are capillaries in the conjunctiva, and normally in a healthy eye, you can see those red vessels just a little bit over the whites of the eye. But when an infection is present, those vessels become dilated and leaky, and it creates a much more visibly red eye. Pink eye generally is kind of self-limiting. It's irritating, it's uncomfortable, but in most cases it's relatively benign. However, it is highly, highly contagious. You can get it in one eye or both. Moving on with the external structures of the eye, we're going to look at what's called a collection of structures known as the lacrimal apparatus. The lacrimal apparatus includes the lacrimal gland, which produces a watery fluid that we refer to as tears. The ducts that those tears travel through, or the lacrimal secretions travel through onto the surface of the eye. The lacrimal canaliculi, which are small tubes or canals which open up from the medial corner of the eye. They lead to the lacrimal sac, and then the nasolacrimal duct, which empties out into your nasal cavity below a piece of bone referred to as the inferior nasal concha. If we can just go back and elaborate on these structures and talk a little bit about the function. The lacrimal gland is about the size of an almond. It's in the upper lateral, or it's associated with the upper lateral portion of your eye, right? It produces watery secretions known as tears, which is mostly water, but also contains enzymes that have antimicrobial qualities. What happens is those secretions, they are released on a more or less ongoing basis out of the lacrimal gland. When we are emotionally upset, the autonomic nervous system stimulates this gland, so production of this fluid is increased and you tend to tear up. But this liquid washes across the eye from lateral to medial. And the function here is to keep the outer surface of the eye moist, as well as to basically wash away small particles, dirt, and debris, right? They'll washed across this way, where the fluid enters the lacrimal canaliculi and then passes into the nasolacrimal duct and into and onto the wet mucous membrane present in our nasal cavity. And under most conditions, the amount of secretions produced by the lacrimal gland is basically imperceptible, and it just mixes with the secretions that are in the nasal cavity to begin with. However, as I mentioned earlier, during periods of emotional upset or emotional experience in general, the autonomic nervous system increases the activity of the lacrimal gland, and the amount of secretions produced increases, and it can increase beyond the capacity of the lacrimal canaliculi's ability to drain it. When the amount of production exceeds the ability to drain, that's when you will get tears running down the corner of your eye. And before tears actually run, you might notice that you get kind of sniffly, right? Because you have these excess secretions making it down into the nasal cavity and producing a little bit of a runny nose effect that causes you to sniffle a bit. Right? Well, moving on to the next set of structures, we're going to look at a set of muscles known as the extrinsic eye muscles. The word extrinsic means exterior or on the outside, and as you can see in the diagram, these muscles attach to the external surface of the eye. These are what actually move your eyeball when you look to the left or to the right, or when you're tracking a word across the page, or tracking or following an object through your visual field. These are the muscles that are moving your eye, allowing you to do that. There are 6 sets of muscles. 4 of them have the word rectus in them. The word rectus means straight, right? And so these rectus muscles run straight from the eye along the sagittal plane, right? The one that's located on the lower surface of the eye is the inferior rectus. When it contracts, it pulls our eyeward downward, or our eyeball downward. Okay? You have a lateral rectus. Right? When it contracts, it pulls your eye laterally. Right? There is a superior rectus. So here's the superior rectus. The superior rectus, when it contracts, it moves your eyeball in an upward direction. Right? There's also a medial rectus. It's not visible in this image, but it lies adjacent to the or on the same side of the orbit of the eye as the nose. You also have 2 muscles with the word oblique in them. The word oblique refers to the fact that something is happening at an angle, and so these attach to the eyeball at an angle. the inferior oblique attaches to the lower, or is more closely associated with the lower surface of the eye, and you can see it here, right? It's the inferior oblique. And then you have the superior oblique. The superior oblique is kind of interesting. What happens is it comes up through the back of the orbit of your eye, and then it hooks through this little structure known as the trochlea, and then makes like a right-hand turn and attaches to the upper surface of your eye underneath the superior rectus. And when it contracts, it's going to cause your eye to rotate laterally and downward. You can see these same muscles when you look at the eye from above in superior view. You have the superior rectus. Right? You have the medial rectus, which we couldn't see in the earlier diagram. You have the lateral rectus. We can't really see the inferior rectus here, but what we can make out is we can see how the superior oblique comes up. How the superior oblique comes up through this little loop of tissue known as the trochlea to attach through a tendon on the eye. And notice that this is tendinous tissue right there rather than contractile muscle tissue. So on the models, that area appears white. So we're going to identify that as the superior oblique, even though on the models it's showing white rather than the red color of a muscle tissue. Right? That's the external structures of the eye. We'll pick up with the internal eye structures in the next video.